So, okay, it's 1:15 on a Friday afternoon. Let's get underway. Now, I'm streaming again as usual. So last week we had a look at I was away, but because in the professional programming course, one of the things we do is we look at choosing the right language, right? So and understanding that you have more tools than just C++ and OO tools, that you could use visual tools, or you could use a logic language, or you might want a functional language. Now, for functional languages, a couple of years ago we had a master's student write a whole thesis on can you do game programming in a functional language? Right? Because when you think of game programming, you think of state, and functional languages don't have state, they just have what's returned from functions. So how do you update the screen when all you have is what's returned by functions? Do you pass the screen to the function and therefore have the screen returned from the function? Like, how do you know what the screen was, or how do you know what the player was doing if you don't have this idea of state? And so that's a challenge in the way you think about game programming. But it came up during the week because one of the students in this course came to show me some of his code and was wondering about where to declare variables. And inside his Java function, he had the code doing a this dot input equals blah and this dot status equals true, right? And so those two were object variables, member variables, that were being updated on that object. Now, nowhere in the function description did it say that those two object member variables were going to be updated, right? Because he didn't need to have them returned from the function, and he didn't have to put them into the parameter call for the function. They were just side effects that happened because you, like, the call was read an HTTP data, right? And so you had data and status, and then once you'd read an HTTP data somewhere else in the class, you could say, oh, give me the data you have and check the status is true, right? Now, that's side effect programming. One of the things you guys do in C++ a lot and Java is side effect programming, where you call a function and inside that function you can change some of the variables, members of that class, right? Of the instance of that class, you change those variables. But that creates a problem for debugging and understanding what's going on, because you don't know when you look at the function call what parts of the object are being changed by it, right? So in the functional approach, you would say, no, you don't change anything as a side effect inside a function call, right? So you never update your class members inside function calls, even though you can access them perfectly, right? You can, because you're inside the class, right? You're a function inside the class, so you've got access to all the member variables. You don't update them unless the call is returning that value and you say, like, this dot blah equals and function call. So the member, so it doesn't kind of use side effects to create settings. Now, that approach of using side effects is very common in C++ programming and OO programming. In fact, OO programming kind of encourages it, right? Because it's saying, well, you know, this is an object with state, you can change the state. But if you were going to set state, then you could actually have function calls that were set blah, and you would actually explicitly say, I am setting this member variable, and that would get the return of a function call. And so you're trying to avoid this idea that, you know, I just call some stuff, it randomly changes things in the class, I call another thing, it randomly changes stuff in the class, and I just have to remember what that state is. Right? Those of you who did graphics programming, OpenGL is a state-based language, and that's really annoying sometimes, right? When you change something and you've got to kind of look back through your code to work out, okay, when was it last set? because I have no idea what state it is, because I'm doing a side effect where this changes this side effect and this is now in this new state. So one of the reasons I gave you the link to Haskell and to functional programming, and we gave you the Prolog and the Haskell, was to try and get you to understand this idea that you can program without state, right? Where everything is merely the return from a function. Right? So some of you had a go at that. Do you, like, what did you think? What do you guys think of that functional approach? So people had a go. Unusual? Can you see benefits of only having things returned from functions? Makes things clearer. Any other thoughts of why functional programming might be really nice? Why would you want to do functional programming rather than having side effects in objects? When you're testing code, what do you need to do? So with functional programming, when you're testing, you can give it inputs and it will always give you the same output. So the input-output pair, you know what it is. But for an OO language, when you're having side effects, you've then got to kind of inject state. You've got to be able to have what state the object is in when I perform a function. Because depending on what state it is, it might access those variables and it might change those variables in the overall state of the object. And so just doing an OO doing a string append, for example. If I just do a string append to a string object, so I've got a string object and I go dot append, what will the string now contain? What does a string contain when you do a string dot append to it?
The original string and the thing you appended.
Yes, so I need to know what the original string was to be able to verify whether I've appended correctly. Right? And so I need to have the state of the object before I can test it. Right? And whereas in functional programming, I have to pass everything in, and so I say, well, what happens when I append Simon to ABC? Well, I get ABC Simon, because I see everything coming in the parameters, and that's what I get out, right? There's no state that I'm also like having to deal with. Right? So it makes testing much, much easier. It makes it much harder to hack into code. It makes the code much safer because there are no lingering side effects of your code, right? I can't kind of have left things hanging around and then come back to them because everything is destroyed immediately after it's used. And it also encourages you to be explicit about what you're doing, right? So as you see, it's clearer what's going on. You have to be very explicit. It makes some things harder because you don't have state, but it makes something clearer. Now, I also got you to do logic programming last week, where you had a look at Prolog. Some of you had a look at Prolog. It's a weird thought pattern, is Prolog, right? Because for me, the best way of thinking about it, and those who did the exercise, hopefully you'll understand this, is to think about it as pattern matching, right? That everything you do is looking for a pattern to match. So all logical statements are things like if this, then this. And then you set something to true, and all of those ifs scan to match those patterns of what statements are true in the language. Right? And it's trying to expand what's true. And if you look for something, it's kind of backwards chain from, oh, you want this thing? Then I need this thing, which means I need this thing, which means I need this thing, which is all a pattern matching approach. Right? So it's not like thinking normally that you do it in imperative programming. You have to think of the relationships between things rather than the explicit, this thing is this, then do this to it, this thing is this, do this to it. Right? Saying, well, what How do I describe relationships between things? And how do I match patterns of things so they generate new patterns of things? Okay, so that was kind of what we had, what we kind of was doing last week. Did any of you have any questions from those exercises? Because none of you sent me any questions. No? Okay. If you didn't do them, I would still recommend going and having a look. As a professional programmer, one of the things we want you to be able to do is think deeply about the paradigms you're using. Why am I doing it this way? Is there a functional way of doing this? Is there a logic way of doing this? One of my previous students, we were teaching Lisp at the time, and he went to the UK and actually founded a company and became successful and eventually sold off the company, basically by programming things in Lisp. And he was said that, you know, no one else was using Lisp, but he was doing file processing and internet processing, and found that Lisp-like functional programming and infinite length of strings and variable character like number sizes meant that he could just change numbers and expand numbers to any size. He didn't have like 64-bit limits and things. Meant that he could actually play with the data he was accessing far more effectively and far quicker than any other competitors. Right? So that his functional language experience was a competitive advantage. Right. So what we're going to do today was, I was hoping that I would have some of you to be able to review some code. I was also going to suggest talking about a little bit about one of the questions that came up during the week, which was on where to declare variables in your code and scope. Right? So, if we plug this in, I'll actually plug it in there so we can see stuff up here, rather than just the people on the stream being able to see things, because I am streaming as usual. So, if we look up here, so this block of code, so if we have a look, so this is on the thing. So for a for loop, when you do, yeah, if you can turn those on, when you do a for loop, one of the things that you'll find is in C++, are they turning on? Eventually they might be. So in C++, oh, my, okay, why has my stream suddenly lost its display? My poor streaming people have lost my display for some reason. It's gone black. That's unusual. Play capture settings. Ah, right, okay. I now know why, because when I plugged this in it went, oh, multi-screens. Ah, I don't know how to do that anymore. So the stream, I'll have to add in a new display capture. Or not. I should let the stream know what we're doing. So what I'll do is I'll just copy that, and unfortunately, because Chrome is being Chrome, it doesn't display to open broadcast service properly, so I can go to there, I can go there and add in capture and add the Firefox. It'll add the first Firefox window. That one. Right. Okay. There we go. Okay, so now I'm back. Right, so here with this, the placement of the declaration, right? So in C++, you've got the for I equals 0, I less than 10, I plus plus, right? And I can do an append of a to string of that I to append it to a string, having set the standard string. Oh, I should set the standard string to the empty string. I did that in my normal code, but I'll do that in here. So edit. So in here, this should be set to empty, otherwise should complain. And save. So that gets set to the empty string. If I try and access I outside of that for loop, it'll go boom. No, you can't access I because I is scoped inside the for loop. Right? In JavaScript, var is not scoped inside the for loop. Var is scoped to the nearest block, and so the var I here, you can do this line of code where you can check what the I is outside of the loop. Now they recognize this was a problem, so in ECMA 5 I think it was, they added let, or 4?
No,
5. So in ECMA 5 they added the let, and it's let, and what's the other one with let? Let, and is it not? No, it's not const. There's another one. There's let, and yeah, you can do let, right, which scopes the variable to inside the for loop, right? But in this case, this is still valid. Now, one of the questions here is, where do you put the declaration? There is, just like I've said before, there is debate around where you should put it. So Google have a standard. So when you have a how should I do something question, one of the ways to solve it is to go and look for standards, right? Look for how you do this. So when I went looking, and you can see here, I can go back and you can see me doing searches for scope of variables declaring in loop C++ 17. Right? Here I'm looking for how does that scoping work? When I go in here, so loop scope in C++, this one came from a search for, should I declare variables at the top of a function in the body? Okay, so this is me kind of looking for people making those arguments. Right? Now, part of my process is when I'm trying to look for these standards, I go and find the debate and see what the debate is. Right? So rather than just present to you guys, oh, you do it like this, what you should be thinking about is, how should I stick to a standard? How do I, as a professional, what do I need to do? And so one of the things you'll eventually find is you'll find there'll be coding styles and the declaring of usages, and you can see JavaScript pops up partly because it does it in a weird way, because it has the scope issue. And one of the ones you will find is, hopefully, the Google style, right? So Google has a C++ style, and it has a local variables style, and it says, well, where should you define this, and what should it look like? So if I make that a bit larger, whoop. So going and finding a standard and then saying, okay, well, perhaps for our company we should use, I'm now got myself out of, if I go back and then go forward, there we go, and forward declaration. So this has local variables that should take me to the right place. Now it took me to the right place. Okay, so it also talks about whether you should initialize or not. Right? So when you guys program code, do you initialize your value? Do you initialize them when you first use them? So do you follow this standard here? Do you always do that, or do you sometimes declare them and then initialize them later? So You're following the good standard that Google says. Part of the reason for that is that, you know, you don't want to be sitting around with a declaration way up here and have it no reasonable value, right? Because there'll be a period where you might want to use it, or you might come back to it and someone might start using it where it's an uninitialized value. The initializing with bracketed initialization, so you can actually, in C++, you can say, right, if I've got a vector of things, rather than declaring them by kind of pushing back variables, I declare it all as a standard initializer. Right? So Google says you should use a standard initializer. It also says, well, you know, there are cases where you might want to do this sort of thing where I do break that rule. Right? Now, it says there that one of those is going to be faster than the other. Right? So if you put the object creation inside your for loop, right? So I create the initializer inside the for loop. Because I'm doing that thousands of times, I'm going to construct that piece of memory, do something with it, and then delete it. And then reconstruct a new version of it, do something with it, and delete it. So that declaration happens thousands of times, right? Or in this case, 100,000, a million times. So here it actually breaks its own rule, right? And says, no, I'm going to pre-declare this outside of a for loop for efficiency reasons. Right? Now, when you are thinking about your code, when you are thinking about is this good code or bad code, here they're showing you we've got this rule about always initializing when you declare, except in this case where efficiency trumps the readability of the code. Right? It also means that now if, before, f was only, in this first example, f is only accessible inside the loop. For the second example, f is now accessible outside the loop. Right? So there could be a cost in terms of potential faults by being able to access f outside the loop, and if the loop doesn't occur, so if that 100,000 times or a million times was a variable, and you never went into the loop, and so you never initiated f, you would have a foo that didn't have anything, that was uninitialized and didn't have a value. So, you know, these are the challenges around where is the right thing to do. Okay? And as I said to the student, for defining when you do this, we generally go down the declare it as like as tightly scoped as possible. Right? However, you probably want to put it near where it is scoped. So, for example, in the in our code, in the JavaScript code that we had before, here, doing a var for this I here is misleading. Right? That can mislead you as to the scope of that code, because that I has kind of now propagated out to the scope of the function that's in. So in that case, putting the I up the top in the scope of the function in it might be the better option. Right? So you've got to understand the language you're in to know what's going to be best there. Right? So C++ also, so it used to propagate scope. So wherever you declared something, it would propagate it out to the full scope of that program. Right? Now at least it checks that you're not before the declaration. Right? So when you declare something, if you try and use I before you go int I, it goes, no, that I occurred before the declaration of I. Rather than just saying, oh, we'll just propagate, anytime you declare, we'll propagate it out. So it's now the scope of the whole thing. So there is an I to use in here. Right? That used to be a problem. And that's why C++ and C had always go at the top. Right? That's now very old. I think from C98 you could declare in just C, you could declare things anywhere you liked, and it would deal with the scope and the management. Right? So So looking at how your language works. Also, you know, you should never write a for loop like that really in C++ anymore. What should that look like? It should be a ranged for, right? I should just say, oh yeah, I need 10 of these eyes. Right? There is a slight so one of the interesting things is for optimization purposes, if I actually go to that code, now this is I can show you this code. It's a bit weird. Oh, the internet people can't see it, but this is, oh, I need to make this bigger. So this is actually a block of code that is in a function on my 360 course, the game programming course, where I look at evil pointer manipulation, right? Just to discuss like memory manipulation, right? Because you guys know like the Scepter and the Spectre and Meltdown, right? Which were to do with predictive evaluation, right? So it was pre-caching things. You can also go into pointers and start playing with them and have a look around inside memory. And so that's what we were doing up here. Is I was doing a whole bunch of crazy pointer manipulation. I don't expect you ever to have to do this. It was more me just playing with the code. But in here, the for loop, this for, which is I to 10, I could recode and do an now it's auto actually I'll do what you're supposed to do, which is when you can't remember how to code something, go ranged for C++, ranged for in C++ 11, and eventually it'll show me. Right, so a nice example for also, where is the nice integer example? So there goes all the examples. So you can do ranged fors, you can do for autos, and there's a nice example of doing it in just with a set of numbers. So for NA, I need to find for auto I and CV, they're all 0 to 5s, so that's in the vector, that's I in the vector, that's auto I in the vector, auto CV equals vector, so those are all autos in vectors for ranged within loop. So I could use the ranged for there for a loop statement. Have you guys used ranged fors in C++? Yeah. So
as
when
far as I'm aware, they're only for like going through containers.
Through containers. There is one. So it is you can use rather than ranged fors for loop C++. The new C++ range, there's a for loop which you can, yeah, evil. Where is the short list way of doing it? There is a shorter list way of doing for loops where you can just tell it to go through X number of times. I can't find it. Interesting. So for loops with iterators, I should be able to do auto I is then 10 plus. Nope, it requires me to do int. So this in general, this idea, oh actually the guys online can't see it anyway, but this in general, I'm just playing with a string and doing an append to a string. Do you guys use the string class? and vector class. Vector is faster than almost any other data structure, right? So if you're going to do a data structure, use vector, right? Because strings are really, like, strings are slow, pointers are slow, linked lists are slow, all of that is slow. Vector is pretty much how everything works underneath. Okay, so this was a where do I declare these, like how should I write it? Here I've got it declared to 0. I used a standard for loop, but a range for loop where you go through the numbers you actually care about, often easier. The challenge of functional programming is becoming easier in C++ 17 with multiple return values from functions, because it's just now becoming possible in C++ 17. I think last semester I tried, it was the beta version of C++ 17 that allowed you to do this, which means Visual Studio still didn't include it as standard. But if you downloaded the new compiler into it, you could do this multiple return values by auto-generating a pair or a tuple coming back from a function. Right? So it gives you different ways of thinking about code. Okay, now, you guys have some visual code I'd like to show? Come on, bring it up. So what we're going to do is we're going to show another paradigm. So this was having a look at where you define things. Last week you looked at the Haskell and object-oriented, and now we're going to look at some visual programming. Right, so bring it over here, or you can plug in your thing and we can change the HDMI cable. Yes, I have. You can probably use my one. I'll do that. And what I'll do is I'll tell my stream that, oh, by the way, stream, it's probably best if I make that huge and move it up to in front of things. There we go. And I can point that at the screen. So if that gives me a screen. So I should just toggle this to, nope, 10. Ha!
So should we maybe explain what the whole thing is trying to do first? Like, what's the result of all this? Or?
Well, okay, what we can do is for a start, I think I might explain a little bit about what blueprint programming looks like, because for some of you there, you would never have seen this, right? And Irvin, have you seen?
Nope.
No.
But it looks very familiar with something else.
It looks very similar to another programming style you've used before. Yeah. Okay, so this is from the Unreal Game Engine, yes? It's unreadable on that screen. I wonder how I get it closer. I can kind of hold it. I can narrate it. I'll do some, because me standing there is going to look terrible. Okay, so
Can you zoom in as possible, but there's a lot of glare.
yeah, there is a bit of glare coming off these lights. In theory, I could turn the lights off somewhere. Are the lights?
Sure.
Yeah. What happens when I turn the lights down? Yeah, it becomes slightly better, but not hugely. I'll just see if I can make that slightly bigger. There. Okay, so what we've got in Unreal is that it has both C++ underneath, but also a visual programming language, which allows you to have containers. Now these containers have connectors, and those connectors basically tell you how either outputs work, or how in this case we have a construction script that has a sequence container. That sequence container you can add things to. And so the first one here in that sequence, so that big block on the left hand side there, is saying, right, do this thing, then do this thing, then do this thing, then do this thing, then do this thing. Right? So it is a sequence block. And then out of each of one of those, you can take an activation cable and go and run another bit of code. Right? So it's trying to, so this is showing kind of sequential flow of a bunch of things. Now, if you have a look at the then for, right? So the fourth thing here goes through to a construction loop, which is a subgraph of activities, and then goes on a linear flow through to the store component to add, and then add all components. Right? So it steps through. You can imagine this like a function call, but it's stepping through those objects.
This is a preview of the actual function when I hover.
And when you hover, you get a preview of the actual function that's going on. So if you scroll, if you zoom out a little bit, so the idea is that this block of code has one input in, and then a lot of these. You have designed here, you've got a couple of these things here which say things like these two are inputs, so looping track and spline are inputs to later functions. Right? Now some people when they design these say all things that are coming from outside need to be pushed all the way to the left. Right? So you can see, what are the parameters coming in? Which is more like the C style when we're talking about where do you declare variables. This is kind of a bit like that, is where do you declare inputs. Now here, you've kind of got them all happening up this line, which is also reasonable because you've got a clear place where they're occurring. Because with this code, you can place these anywhere you like, right? You can move them around, and this could be placed down here and come in from the left-hand side, and so organizing visually what's going on is quite important. So you've got this idea of lining those up there, which is nice. This one, so if you go to the set start position, you've got its target and the current loop index. So if you had one coming in here, where would you have put that? So like you've got looping track, if you had a condition coming in here, would you have put it on the one before or on the one up?
I would have moved this one out and placed it in space here.
Right. So that principle is that kind of idea of putting it as close to where it's used as possible. Right? And that can create some problems, right? Because you can say, well, okay, where is this thing being used? And it could be quite hard to find it because it could be buried deep in the thing, right? So you kind of have to think, who needs to know when this is being used?
Well, but on the contrary to that, I just jump into something a bit more. Like when I have these kind of stuff, and I have inputs here, and I need this here. That doesn't look pretty in the end.
No. So what's your solution for that?
Yeah, I store them in another variable. I found out that that's actually done automatically, but that's recent, and this is a bit old.
Right.
So I can just like git input or
Go git.
yeah, current, and so that's the same that's coming here. Oh wait, yeah. There's an you can skip this having to store it part, but yes, I store them in another variable and just pull them out when I need them.
Yeah. So if you've not seen like visual programming, as you can see, this is getting quite large, right? So scale out again.
Yep.
Yeah. So here, normally our positional layout of text is kind of one of the important ways for us to see what's going on. With visual programming languages, we're still trying to work out what is the appropriate way of viewing these to try and make them clear to understand what's going on. Right? So there isn't a lot of good advice out there yet, though some of the Unreal stuff, they're getting better at suggesting ways of displaying things. So here, you can see this is very much a linear across the page. Right? You could have made it linear down. Right? Normal text code would be linear down, and these would kind of flow waterfall down. But because it kind of exits the left, exits the right and comes into the left, it feels more natural to put it
Yes.
left to right, read it across the page. Right? So this is that competition between what are we used to doing in text coding and what are we doing in visual coding. Okay, so you've got these now, and you're doing a bunch of repeated things in here. So what are these? Why are these things being repeated so often? What's going on there? So they're all getting spline and local distance and spline and local distance.
They are getting information about the start points and end points for. So they are all different.
All right, so let's get location along spline. This is get tangent.
Yes, and that's the start of the spline, like the spline section, and the end of the spline section of the location and tangent.
Local end distance, so local start distance, and
start distance, yeah, the tangent and location, and then the end location and tangent.
So one of the things that I kind of visually think is interesting, and from a coding layout kind of way, the fact that you've got this get location along spline, right? That is kind of more, like that is sitting underneath that set, right? So if you
Oh yeah, there was two different.
yeah, because this lot refers to here. This has no relationship to that.
No.
No. But visually, it's closer to that than it is the one that it actually relates to. So when you zoom out, it looks pretty in a sense that they're all lying around, but actually creating more of a visual gap between these things going to that. And those two are starts and these two are ends.
Yep.
Right? Because visually, I see green, blue, green, blue, or sorry, blue, green, blue, green, blue, green, blue, green. I have no idea that these two second ones are quite different greens to the first two. Yeah? Because if you go and have a look inside them, yeah. So conceptually, what's going on here? These two are the end points, and those are the start points. Yeah.
Yep.
So this, for me, this is kind of misleading visually, right? Because it suggests that there's four of the same kind of thing happening. This looks like this looks like that one, and this one looks like this one, right? But so you do AB and then AB again, right?
They do the same thing for different spots, so I mean, it could be kind of collapsed, but.
Well, I'm
Yeah.
not suggesting that, but visually
Yeah,
connect them in a different way,
Yeah.
right? Because with visual programming language, if what you see doesn't match with the way you think about what's going on, then that cognitive mismatch is going to cause you problems at some point, or someone else who's looking at the code has to get quite deep into here to see. Yeah, so those two are.
So I could like these and then put a sequence, and then I could have I put a comment. Let's see, and this is
Start. Yeah. So if you separated it out and said this is start, and then this is end,
Yeah.
right? And you see, this is why the grabbing has been a problem, right? Because these two are actually down here,
Yeah.
right? Because when you did a square grab, of course, they went with the thing they were physically closest to,
Yeah.
right? And so that says start. And I think you can do this in sequence, that's the start bit and this is the end bit, because you have to collect the start ones before you do the end ones, right?
That could be the different.
Does it matter which one happens
that
first?
doesn't matter.
Okay,
No,
so they
no.
could in theory happen in parallel.
Yeah.
Right. Because if you don't use those until much later.
No, all of those are used immediately down here, but I mean, all the information they're getting is static.
Right. So to some extent, this idea of saying, well, we can do these two and these two in parallel. Right? If you're talking about optimization, this implies that this has to be done before this one. Right? Whereas you might put them in parallel and say, well, so long as they're both done before I moved on to the next thing, the compiler could then choose to do things differently. Right? But even just that visual blocking them to say these two are the start, these two relate to the end, means it much easier for me to find where things are. Right? because you can. One of the PhDs was looking at this kind of stuff for debugging quicksort, right? And if you have quicksort with an error in it in visual code versus quicksort with an error in it in text code, this is much harder to debug, right? Was what he was finding, right? Is that kind of really small errors were very hard to debug unless we start adopting a much more kind of strategic approach to the way we do layout. Okay, so like, do you have questions about your code? I mean, if we do some code review on it, are there any challenges you're having with this code?
There is a point I would like to, I think it's this thing. So, I mean, just to get everyone visualized with it, what the whole thing is doing is it's the racetrack, basically. So the spline is this line going through here, and one segment is from between each point, and these arcs are checkpoints. So here I have all the checkpoints, but they are not ordered.
Right.
They have an ID, so I am ordering them according to the ID. But there's a lot of here that, I mean, there's a lot of for loops, and I would like to, not sure if it could be done a better way.
Right, so you've got, because you've got a for each that's going through.
So first I'm going through all of them, adding them to a new array and inserting them according to their ID.
Okay, so that's sorting them by ID, yep.
Yeah. Then I'm going through all of them and linking them up like a linked list. So during the race, I'm using the linked list to jump to the next, jump to the next, jump to the next.
Right, because their ID doesn't tell you where on the track they are?
The ID doesn't give you any indication of what's next, because the ID is linked to the spline point ID. So like if I have here, this one is 3.
Yep.
This one would be
6.
Yeah.
Okay, right, so there's a spline point ID and there's a checkpoint list that happens at various spline points which aren't necessarily equidistant. Right, okay, yep, I understand.
And then in the end I add another ID, because when they are actually used in the race, they need a different ID for where we are just pushing a sorting algorithm, which is one of the standards. To be able to use that sorting algorithm, I'm giving them another ID which is ordered.
Right, so
at the end they are getting like, oh, you are 0, 1, 2, 3.
So you're having inserted them by their spline ID, right? You've then sorted them by that, and then you do you reinsert them to a new list by the order that they appear.
Yes.
Right, and you also create them like a linked list, so I know which one is.
Yeah. So like they are not stored in another list. They are just stored in one list in the end. And that's by the spline point ID. They are sorted.
And how do you deal with the end point of the racetrack, where it goes back to where the last spline point will be the first spline point? Okay, so technically the reason why I asked that is because that's a boundary condition, right?
Yeah.
So whenever you're reviewing code, look for boundary conditions. So what are your boundary conditions around the end of the race?
No, that's wrong.
Okay, so this is a classic example of how is it like so when I asked you to find something and it takes you a while to hunt through your visual representation to find the thing, this is one of the challenges of visual code, right? I would have expected if you were in text-based, you would have been able to get there much faster, right? So one of the things to also think about when you're designing is, how do I get to things like that quickly, right? If I was asked, where is your boundary condition, how do you find it? So
I think I do it yeah, I do it here at the start when I'm so for when I build each element of the track, I add one to the get next and then modulo. So with the total, so I'm access index 0 if you loop around.
right. So when you get to the last one,
Yeah.
it gets the modulo, so it gets the first one again, so long as you count from 0.
Yes.
Is that susceptible to side effects of counting from 0? So if I put my start point on spline point 2,
Oh no, this is like you can't, like it's the spline just counting along the spline starting at 0 no matter what. So that you can't change where you start counting.
so you're counting along the spline from 0 and you get round. So when I've got my last checkpoint,
Yep.
does it look for the next checkpoint?
Oh yeah, that. Oh yeah, that part. This kind, this one. Let's see, because I'm getting the.
First checkpoint.
So do I have set the first checkpoint yet? If not, we set the first checkpoint and then we keep.
Valid. So this is the if valid check.
Yeah, okay, because I'm starting whatever the first checkpoint is,
Yep.
going through all of them, putting them in order. So they are in order. So now I'm making sure they are all linked up. And when it's done, it's just taking the last checkpoint and linking it with the first.
Right. So at the end. So although you use the modulo, you use the mod. So at
That's I think there's two parts of the code where I'm doing depending on what I'm doing.
right. So for this line, you do it modulo because you're going to come back to 0,
Yeah,
and you're counting. You're looping around on the spline.
yeah. Here I'm keeping a reference.
And here you keep the reference to the first one, because if the first checkpoint was placed at spline point 2,
Yeah.
then you wouldn't be able to refer to just 0 and say, oh, whatever was at spline point 0. So what is that modulo then doing? So it is adding, does it add just one or does it add many spline points when you do modulo, right? Because modulo implies that I might keep going many times through the loop. So when you go back to your spline point here, when you're adding this pin,
Yeah.
so this does number of spline points, and you've got add one pin from loop index. So that is implying that my track continues, and I've just got like 1 to 30, and then, or 0 to 30, and then 0 to 30, and then 0 to 30 in here. How often do I apply that modulo?
Yeah, that happened once.
It only happens once, and it only happens for the very last point.
Yes.
And then you stop because you're going through the number of points there are.
Yeah.
Okay. So my question is,
Yeah.
does the concept of modulo, is that the right?
I could check if there is like branch on the being the last point.
So here, like, so this is what I mean by kind of trying to get your representation to align with what you're trying to achieve. Yes, you're right. Modulo does mathematically achieve what you wanted to achieve, right? Which is when I get to the end, make sure it goes back to 0, right? You guys can understand that, right? However, mathematically, modulo implies, oh, this is something that loops through and is limited to this range. So mathematically, this concept tells me, oh, it's a modulo. They might be doing this many times, and I'm applying a mathematical function to every one that comes in. and so kind of in my way of thinking, it's saying that this, I need to be thinking about which point in the loop, because I certainly know if I was thinking about going a race and I was trying to find out which point I'm at, and I said, oh, I've gone through 85 spline points, if I modulate the number of points on the track, it would tell me where on the track I am. Right? If I just had a counter that was counting up and I had a looping spline, then I'd be using modulo to get me back onto within the range. So that's when I see that kind of looping, that's what I think. So cognitively, it might be better to say, oh, because this only actually needs to ever happen once, and it's explicitly what do I do with my last spline point so that my next one links back to the first one. Yeah, I would do it as an if condition on last point, right? Rather than a modulo. Right? So you can argue against me as well, right? Because this is just that's what I would do. So so the other argument is this is the right mathematical function, right? Yeah. So what do you guys think? Mm-hmm.
We're using a linked list. You just put the last one next to the first one.
So you do that later in the.
Yeah, the linked list is a way later.
Yeah. So
because this needs to happen way before.
So he also does a linked list implementation of them, right? Where he does that last thing, right? But so if you were doing a linked list implementation, as you're stepping through your spline points to find who's next, right? So you could use this modulo to do that, right? Because that's kind of what you're doing. You imagine it was like a linked list. You'd say item 0 next 1, item 1 next 2, item 2 next 3, and then you get to item 10. Let's say there are 10 points. Next, item 9 next is 0, and then I stop because I've gone through. Now, one way of doing that is to say, and you'll see this, I'm sure lots of people will write this, is that you have the next point is I plus 1 mod size of list, right? And that means that you just step through, and when you get to the last one, it just points it back to the beginning, right? So it does point the last of the list back to the beginning of the list. The problem is that mathematical, although that's the right mathematical function and it looks clean, it doesn't cognitively link with what you're trying to do. Right? What you're trying to do is you're trying to say, the last one is a special case. If the last one's a special case, then I should treat it like a special case. Right? And actually explicitly make my code reflect what I'm trying to do, rather than just be the minimal mathematical approach. And that's all partly to do with decreasing your chances of misreading what's going on, right? Because if you're trying to edit things, you're trying to modify things, having this is the special case at the end, rather than this is a clean mathematical way of approaching this, that everything gets the same operation done to it. Okay. So yeah, that's, and I see this with a lot of code. And not just visual code, but actual real code, where you write mathematical functions that do something, and you think, oh, that's a nice mathematical function, it'll do this job for me. And the problem is you're using a feature of that math that if it only occurs once, then it's you're abusing the generality to get a special case, right? It might feel like it's dirtier to put an if statement in, and technically it might be slightly slower with an if statement than doing math, because math is really fast. But at this point, it's not about efficiency. It's about, does this match with what you're trying to achieve?
This only happens when the level 2. No, it doesn't.
Efficiency is not.
It's built into the map, so
yeah,
it's not even.
Yes.
Yeah, it's never done during play. So you never have to worry about efficiency.
No.
And because you are doing something here to every single pin that comes in. Right? And if it's not modifying every single pin, it's only the last one that you need to check, then potentially you should have a special case that says, for the last one, link it to the first. Okay? Okay, we're 1:15 when I should have given you guys a break. But we can take a break and come back in 10 minutes, and we can discuss more of the code. Okay? So, and you guys can come and ask some questions about this kind of code, because you've probably never seen it before. So, okay, take a 10-minute break, and internet people, I'll just leave you running and you can look at code for a few minutes.
The camera has been extremely
Right, okay, so it's been a bit blurry, has it?
I don't know why it went out of focus.
It decided to go out of focus and it stayed out of focus, you reckon?
Yes, it has been like that. But you have basically been narrating everything.
Yeah, so you can, the weird things are, you can't actually read what they are, but you can see that they're connected.
Yes, pretty much.
Yeah.
And it didn't want to stop you.
Yeah. I'm narrating most things.
Yes. And force focus on
Because one of the things that I think about when we're looking at the use of code is, does the code cognitively map with what you're trying to achieve? Right? So, and it's I do the same like when I talk about forums, right? Like, so one of the standard things, you see this in code, is if you've written for, right?
Yeah.
You don't mean for, you mean what? It's just, and so for me, that is a bad way of doing something, because that's not what you meant. You meant while. You just, for some reason, don't like using the word while, right? And you get, I see students do this quite a bit, where they'll know some bit of clever math or something that achieve something like that mod function. But although it works, it's not really what it was intended for, or it gives me the wrong perception. And so, yeah, it is. So rather than getting to think, okay, rather than code something that will work, what tells the reader what this is actually doing? And that's quite a different way of coding. Once you're saying, okay, rather than just using the thing that will work, I try and do it the right way. So I think, yeah, if you've got a string, you would probably use a string object rather than an array of characters, right? And it's interesting because in the Haskell example that was online that I gave them, right? Haskell, because it's a functional language, does those weird things that a string is merely the concatenation of the letters done with increasing building. So it's actually like, so when you do string ABCD string, it's actually shorthand for open bracket A, open bracket B, open bracket C, open bracket D, open bracket E, close, 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 close. And so it, because it think of them as like function concatenations rather than values. So yeah, it's, yeah. Unfortunately, that is where functional language, for me, really break down, is when how they represent data isn't anything like how you think about data. But no, it's I'll actually just see if I can see that one. So try Haskell, because they're plugged in. So I can go to me.
Yeah, but you don't have the HTML. They have the table.
Yes, they, right, they had control.
Yep.
So now I can go back to, but I also have to go back to my Firefox, because it's Firefox that is. It's really bad. If we have a look at the Haskell, if you hadn't tried the Haskell on the stream, this try Haskell in 5 minutes is quite a nice wee site for at least getting to know a little bit about Haskell. So you can type help, and then it goes through. If you just type 5 + 7, it goes and does 12, and then gives you number became, or a letter became a number. And because it's online, it's quite nice that it just kind of takes you through, and then it does this Chris, and it says Chris is an array of characters, but it's when you can just create arrays of characters, and you can sort with a function that just says sort. But as you get into these sword Chris, and you can create objects which have 2 components to them, and I can grab the first of those objects, and then I can do weird functions, and I start getting into kind of weirder and weirder things. So here is where it starts talking about syntactic sugar and saying, well, okay, these are equivalent, so A concatenated with B turned into an array is equivalent to the array of A and B, and then it says, you know, the character A, comma the character B, comma the character C is the string ABC. Those are syntactically identical in this language, which means you get like, and yeah, so your syntactic sugar of the concatenation of things is quite, yeah, is there to try and make it easier for us to understand what's going on, but is not, yeah, not really representative of how we think about the world. So that's why I think Haskell and things are hard for the students to get their head round, because you start doing this kind of let's square x equals x times x in map square to this array, and so you're kind of creating a function as you're applying it to the data.
Yeah.
It's kind of because I don't have state, so I can't take a state of things and pass that around as a variable, so I don't have variables, I just have this constant.
That reminds me of streams in Java.
Yes. Yeah, because you have to kind of...
Yeah, because you have to do everything, and then you're done.
Yeah, but one big chunk of this and this and this and this and this and this pass to this and this pass to this and that. There we are. Yeah, and here you can, so the so to upper, yeah, so you mapping the kind of map to upper, where was I? Yes, so the idea of kind of concatenating things so that things return values are the inputs for next things, and you just build bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger things, becomes quite confusing and quite hard to read. So yeah, but it's useful and interesting to think about how functional programming works. One of the challenges that I also have with the professional programming course is also getting them to comment code in their thesis in a way that's not like what they've seen before. Because normally what I try and make the distinction in the course of the difference between commenting, like I talk about like 3 commenting styles, right? There's educational comments where we try and teach them what's happening in the code, right? Which isn't professional comments, those are educational comments. They're valuable and educational, but they're not what you see in professional code. There is justification comments, which is what they write to try and explain to us that they understand what they've done. Right? Which again, are not the professional. You're not having to justify yourself to other professionals. And so both of those, which they see a lot, aren't what we want from commenting, right? And aren't what professionals outside want. And so it's getting to that comment things which are difficult. And that's why in the one of the things we used to do in the mobile course was to talk about how do you know what bits of your code are difficult for other people, right? Because that's a kind of understanding other people's brains. And so one of the things we talk about here, and what I was trying to say there is, when I ask you to find something, right, the longer it takes you to find it, the more poorly structured your code is, basically. It's you know what I mean? You've got something going wrong here. So if I'm trying to debug something, I should be able to find it quickly. And they're finding boundary conditions, I should find them quickly. You should know, like, if you don't remember where they are, you should have a way that your structure tells you where they are.
Sorry for interrupting.
Yeah.
Well, I have a problem with my partial thesis.
Right.
I found a way to download nowhere as a map,
Right.
either as a zip file or as a SQLite map, a SQLite file,
Okay.
which I don't know what it will contain, but it will be a table in a SQLite database.
Norway is
Probably PNG build pictures. Probably. I didn't try it yet.
okay. That's but I Norway as an SQL file. That's I'm not sure what that would be. Okay, but yes.
But probably it will be a pictures, like SQL pictures. Like pictures stored in the database.
Right. Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah. SQL pictures there.
I was working with it for a long time, so I got confused too. So the thing is, I downloaded it in my PC, and I let the PC was running for the whole night.
Yes.
And when I work on the morning, it wasn't Zoom 15. It wasn't even yet in Zoom 22, which is more and larger. Which is in the end, probably it will end with 2 GB in a mobile application, stored in the assets folder inside the mobile in the APK package.
I don't want that app.
You know, you'd look at that and go, I'm not sure I want mobile data to download 2 gig now.
But the thing is that
You can do I think Android will let you have those, but you need to have you need to set up your packaging correctly, because at that size I believe it needs to download it in multiple stages. So there is a packaging way where you say what like the parts are. But yeah.
But yeah,
Okay.
we found a way, like I went out with your idea that you told me about, that we can have just a small piece where the technician need to work on, and I can take it from the lowest zoom to the highest zoom, and probably it will be around 1 GB. Probably, if you take the full zoom.
Okay.
Which I can like reduce it to 800, between 500 and 800. Like,
Right.
let's make it like this. And I'm still putting it in the assets folder,
Right.
in the APK package.
Right.
Package. And since our application is not going to be installed in Google Store or Apple Store, so
Why isn't it?
because the company wanted for itself.
Okay, they want it private. Okay, yeah.
So
Well, for Apple, there's a whole bunch of how you get private apps on
actually
Apple
we are
devices.
developing only Android, so I
Oh,
didn't
good.
say that.
Because in Apple, you have to get a special account that allows, like, all of those Apple devices have to be tagged to the company and owned by the company, because Apple said otherwise they have to
we
go
are
to the store.
developing
and-
Android, so.
Okay, good. So Android, you can just share an APK, and then you don't have to be on the store at
But
all.
what do you think about an IPK with 1 GB at the end? Like considering that our code is 500 megabytes.
Yeah, if you are statically sharing it, i.e., as in you have it as an APK that people download specifically rather than on the store, then yeah, a gig or 2 gig is going to be fine, right? If this is a work tool, then it can be larger, right? Downloading new file sets, right? So that's so as you say, if because so they're doing the project is electricians all over Norway, right? And they're trying to kind of have a local file. But if you download all of Norway at the resolution, it's quite large, right? Because I would have thought you could have got OpenStreetMap's map of Norway.
Yeah, we went with the OpenStreetMap and we downloaded them at the whole map for Norway.
Right, at the highest resolution, yeah. And
From the lowest to the highest, from 0 to 22.
right, yeah. So, and that's mini gig.
Yeah, that's end up with. Before I stopped the downloading,
Yeah.
it ends up with 1.4 gigabytes.
Right.
Which in Zoom 13. I didn't came yet to 22, so.
Okay, so you're halfway through grabbing your
No,
data.
less than halfway.
Oh, less
1
because-
1 3.
Right. Yes. Yeah. So, right. So yeah. So you're going to have a very big file. Now, OpenStreetMaps will allow you to download just areas. Right. So you can give it a coordinate area and it will just download that.
Well, actually, you can give it north point, south point, east and west, and you can collect the whole area.
Yes.
Even if it's the whole Norway.
Yes,
That's
yes,
what I did.
yeah. You can collect just a much smaller area, and then get it to refresh that. So one of the questions is, should you in your bachelor thesis write that bit of access? So I can do that dynamically, and although I have a stand, I save some of them because that's what OpenStreetMaps the app does on your phone. Is when you move somewhere, it says, "Oh, give me the data for this
And when you got so
square.
close, then you download it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. So it only downloads it when you get there, or you can tell it to pre-download an area. Right. So like for example, when I'm going to a new country, I use my home Wi-Fi to download the map. Because now that I've got free, now I've got the standard internet package, I can do it elsewhere. But I used to just cache the entire country map that I was going to before I left home, and then it would use up like a couple of gig, and then I would just have that cached and accessible, right? So you could do that for your app, is you say, well, we've got like, if you're in an area, I'll download that. If you go outside of that area, then I'll go to OpenStreetMap and ask for a new map, right? So it is dynamic.
Yeah.
Right, and then you don't actually need to store it in your assets folders because it's not an asset.
No,
It is.
be an external folder.
Oh, it's downloading, so it is downloadable. So it will be downloaded and stored.
But it will be downloaded locally to the mobile.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
So I can access it.
And then you access it in local storage, right? So if you've got your local storage saved, you save it to local storage under something that you can access. So that would be the way of making that dynamic. And then you give them a relatively small area, and if they move outside that area, you download the new bit and cache that.
But that means I will download, for the first time I will download Norway from 0 to 6, for example, and from lowest 0 to 6, and then when you go closer, 7, for example, then you can go.
You could do it that way. You could just do Norway at like the most zoomed out, and just say, well, that's general Norway. If you don't access the internet, I'm just going to give you general data, and it's only when you go into a particular place that I ask for more detail. Yeah, so you wouldn't even need to go to 6. You could just do it at really 0, 1, right? Something like that. And there's only, and if you zoom in close, it's because you want to know more about that location, right? If you've cached things, you could have saved that. So if, like in Jorvik, if I always zoom in on Jorvik, I don't have to re-download Jorvik every time I do it. I store it.
But what do you think about putting the whole SQL for the whole Norway as a SQLite database inside our server and download from there? That could be another solution.
All right, so not have to hit OpenStreetMaps, but duplicate OpenStreetMaps into your own server. That I think that breaches the end-user license agreements on OpenStreetMaps.
They say as long as you are using it and putting their name in the down in the side, then they're set with it.
If it doesn't breach their terms of service, then yes, you could put it on your server. Though I wouldn't put it on the SQLite server on the phone.
Nope, on the server itself.
Yeah, you mean an actual server?
Actually, it's a Microsoft server, so we need to figure out the way how to change it to SQLite. From SQLite to Microsoft.
Why?
Hmm?
Why would you do it?
Well, I didn't actually try yet if it's work with SQLite.
No, but I mean, so the only reason to do it is if you would be worried about connecting to their server.
Well, you mean that could put the whole map in the server?
Yeah.
Well, just because sometimes you may need to have the map when you don't have the internet. So, sometimes like when you connect to the server, then you don't. Then you download you cache the area that you want, but like it would be easier for you to cache it once than just zooming in when you have internet and just waiting for it to be downloaded. Like once you start the program from the application, you can download it all. Download the part that you want from the beginning, then just waiting for zooming and then getting. As you said the first time, like it's the same solution. I think it's in both.
Well, but the other one. So in both cases, I would still refer to the OpenStreetMaps real data, right? Because that updates. People update that, right? And your cache is not. It will immediately go out of date, right? And so, unless you're worried about traffic data or availabilities or those things, I would still refer to their one. It's just you could have a drop down when I download the program. You could say, where's your home base? I say Jorvik, and it immediately that it starts downloading, it also contacts OpenStreetMaps to give me the full zoom of Jorvik, and then I get that. Right, but you have a drop, so I don't have to zoom into Jorvik. I could just have a drop down of where their home base is, right? Because it may be that you have like 20 sites around Norway, and they just do, I'm Jorvik or I'm Uppland or whatever. Right? You just pick one, and that's the one that starts you by initially downloading that. If you wanted to have that phase, but that's that's not necessary, like not really necessary, right? Because what they'll do is the first time they download the program, they'll go and look at their home base, and then it's okay for it to start downloading it because that's what they expect it to be. Because it's the first time they're using it, they might expect it to be slow. Yeah. Okay.
I just have some suggestions for topics.
Yes. Excellent.
One is continuous delivery.
Continuous integration. So continuous delivery. Right. So.
Automating the process.
Yep. Yep.
And the second one is REST APIs and how to implement them.
Right. So you're thinking. So have you guys looked at loopback and used loopback? Right. Okay. So yeah, there are the REST APIs. There is a various ways of doing those. And we had students both use loopback as an overview, or going like slightly lower level and actually implementing the APIs themselves, right? Because loopback basically implements all of the standard REST API calls to your database and just implements all that for you, right? So, but because it implements it for you, it's hard to find how to modify it if you want one of them to do something slightly different, right? So, so REST APIs and the continuous integration. Okay, so for continuous integration, we have Travis CI. We also have Bamboo. So on, because you guys are using Jira, yeah. So on the Prod 3 server that we've got Jira on, we actually also have a Bamboo installation. So we can we have rights to all of the Atlassian stack of every kind of product they have, and basically we only install the bits that students actually say they are interested in learning about, right? Because there's a lot of Atlassian products, but Bamboo allows you to do the continuous integration stuff. Yeah. So.
To look into that actually, because we are developing a REST API actually.
Okay.
In Java.
So.
It's actually up and running.
Right, so you're doing, so if I go, and I'll let the stream see this, so if you do loopback, so you're implementing it in Java.
I am using a library called Catharsis.
Catharsis.
Which has slightly outdated documentation.
Catharsis. Strong loop in, so Catharsis. No, how do you spell Catharsis?
It's K-A-T-H.
C-A.
It should be K.
So
Catharsis.io is their website.
Catharsis. Right, so that one. Right, Catharsis versus. I'll just see, because if someone is do you mean Catharsis? All right, I missed the R. Right, was okay. So there is a okay. So because if I've suggested loopback and someone was comparing loopback to Catharsis, it would be interesting to see what they saw were the differences, right? So that's one of the first searches I do. Is anytime I'm looking at tech, I see has somebody done a versus to compare them. But so loopback, yeah, builds is a Node.js. So so yeah, builds it on top of Java. So yeah, but you're building the server in Java.
Yes.
Right, so you're not using Node. You're using
Java for the entire backend.
Right. So you've just got a Java backend.
Yes.
Okay. Reason to not use Node.js, or
we are not using Node.js now for backend. We are using React for front.
you're using React for front end.
Yeah.
React Native, and
so I think it would be smart, I guess, to use Node.js. Because
it's more standard to use Node.js for a backend. So what are your thoughts on Java as a backend versus Node.js as a backend?
There's a bunch of backend stuff done in Java as well. So
I've been speaking to quite a few companies now, and they often use Java for backend. as far as they say.
Yeah, as you say, there is a lot of stuff that's been written in Java for backend, right? It's not an unusual thing. So, for example, if you do Node.js versus Java, an epic battle for the developer mindshare, basically what they're saying is that Java versus Node there is probably where Java rocks, there's rocks of its foundation. Where Node.js wins is ubiquity, where Java wins better IDE, Node wins on simple build process, Java remote debugging, Node.js on database queries, Java with libraries, Node.js with JSON, Java with solid engineering, Node.js with speed, Java with threads, Node.js with momentum, so they both are good at cross compiling. So yeah, so basically what it's saying is they're equally good choices, right? So it's just but yeah, so if like, you know, if you're looking for speed in those kind of database accessing and data handling as your primary thing, then Node.js is usually pretty good at that, because it's got like the JSON handling and database accessing with things like loopback. Means you can get a lot of that stuff done really quickly and easily without having to write much yourself. However, if you want to have more control, then Java is a good option. So, yeah.
So the thing with Catharsis is that actually it's a JSON API framework.
Right.
So it handles all the JSON for you, basically through a library called Jackson.
Yep.
In Java.
Yep.
So that's why I said we had mostly just empty classes, because we just extend their default ones, and then everything works. Basically.
Spelled things correctly, it would be better. So yeah, so
I think Catharsis.io, I think is their website.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, so it's a JSON API.
Yeah.
So because sending things back and forth in JSON. So yeah, we can discuss some of JSON API. Yep. Okay. Well, actually, so yes, we'll jump back to you guys. Seeing I've just been talking to. Right. There we go. Okay. So we'll do this last bit of visual programming. Right. So and the stream, I'll point the stream back at here for the last bit. Okay, so
we just found an example of a really, really good code.
okay.
This one.
Okay, so ignore this part.
Yeah. No.
Okay, and then inside there you have inputs and you have spread width, and it.
So what this is helping determine, I don't know why it works like it does.
That's never a good start with professional code. Is I did it, I don't know really why.
So that's why I said, oh no, it's even weirder. It never, I haven't, why?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, now it's, okay, it's changed its behavior, and I don't know why. So these starting positions, they're supposed to go this one, so left, middle, right, and some reason it's left, middle, left.
And then right, middle, right.
Yeah, but how it went before was left, middle, right, right, middle, left.
Okay.
And so I ignore this part. So what? Let's see. So here I tried to reverse it, but apparently now, so you have this constant.
Mm-hmm. The gap between them.
So you take to the left on the first one, and the middle one is 0, and then you get the right one. So it's the negative, 0, positive, and I had to reverse it, but.
Why would you reverse it?
Because it was acting strange. Like,
right.
Look, look at how it's acting now. These are
Yep.
the first three, and we are getting the negative,
Mm-hmm.
the middle, the 0, and the positive,
Mm-hmm.
and that's getting left offset, middle, and left offset.
Okay, go back. Okay, so this is a debugging challenge, right?
Yes.
So one of the things is,
And
I don't know that this is this option 2 is actually the option 2 you've got there, right? Because they're all over the place, right?
yeah.
So knowing like which of these options is happening at what time, right? Because here you're going to return value, right? So when I have inputs,
Yep.
and you go through that negative there, right? Well, that input goes through there and comes out here. So that is, oh, that's because it's,
So in how this
Mhm.
thing works is you get the index.
yeah,
And
chooses which one of these options
yes,
to go with.
passes on.
Right. And what's the blue one? That's just flow of control, yeah? The white one, I mean. The white top?
Yeah, the
Yeah.
top, that's just the flow.
Why does it have to flow to the minus?
No, it's it has to reverse it. So yeah, because it's creating a new variable with the negative value.
Okay, so that has to be done by flow. So you get the input, you then go to flow there, and then it creates a new variable.
Yeah, which is the negative of the.
So when does the positive one variable get created? So that's the positive one is created there.
So
Okay,
yeah,
yeah.
the positive is like you edited it.
But you don't need a flow component for that.
See that this one like sets the value of this one, right? Is that
It is
intentional? Yeah.
Okay, because
Yeah.
that's not how it worked before.
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
Because it has changed the behavior of how this works. So I mean,
So
Unreal and
is this toggling this now?
It is.
Yeah.
It might be.
Yeah, so that's why you get the same one twice.
Because it toggles it negative and then,
Yeah, because it's changed what's actually in spread list, so you get the same thing on option 2 there.
right. So how do you do the flow minus? Basically you work.
Just drag in them type minus. You will need it for the minus flows.
So
Just add 0 and minus spread with the top one. Yeah. You can just take that one to spread with to the bottom.
oh yeah, like this
That's
and
0 there.
Yep, 0. And then take that output.
delete that one.
Yep.
And here now let's see if because like how it should work, I should have this one here and this one there. That's how I want it to work.
Right.
And yeah, okay,
Yay!
it's working.
So now it actually works, yep. Okay, so
Debugging.
so here, so that debugging, this is actually quite a complex structure to get a minus, right? Now that would be much easier to do in code. Yeah. Now I know. So you've got 0, 1, 2. These are zeroed out.
So here I would use a modulo, but it had weirdness, like because I didn't get how everything was working.
Yep. Yep. It's quite messy, right? Do you guys think this looks relatively messy? Yeah. So how would you make this look nicer? Well, yes, you could do that. That's a start. And the spread width, you kind of do want to have it go out to those and have those two being negative and those two being positive. That does now look a wee bit better, though you have got these two things going on.
Here it would make sense to have this
So will that work? Okay, so again, so this, what we've just done there, that's refactoring Visual Code, right? Because we had some code which was bad, it was doing something that was a bit complex, and now it does exactly what it was doing before, right? Except that now you could actually run more tracks if you wanted to, because you've got a modulo, which means you could run more of them, so it actually is better code. And here, I like this modulo because this modulo actually tells me what's going on. Right? So this is, so although I criticize your previous modulo, this is a good modulo. I like this modulo. And I would even probably merge those two at this point, right? So now because there's because it's that, it's clearer to say, okay, this is the that's the -1, that's the +1, and that's the center 0, right? Yeah, and you can't really like, so these option numbers are preset. I take it you can't change their names, so you can't call them left, center, right. No, because ideally what you'd then call them is left, center, right, to give them more names, right? But can you give a name? Promote to variable.
I don't think you can do it when you take in an int, but I think you can for like an enum.
Yeah, if it was an enum, you could name enums.
They would have the name automatically.
Yeah,
we will have the true and false.
Yeah, but here, because we're moduloing it, it's going to be 0, 1, 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2 each time anyway. So you would just, maybe you would, nah, don't worry about it. Yeah. So this, so what we've just done, it was refactoring Visual Code. This is now much nicer. I understand. I can visually see more what's going on here. Right? I probably would still have a comment on it that currently this is ignore this part, right? Which I would probably call it something like, horizontal position. Right? And spread width. Is there a better name than spread width for what's going on there? It could be horizontal offset. Might be because you've got the positive offset and negative offset, right? So you could maybe refer it to track width or something, right? So it's track plate, it's horizontal track placement.
I think that would be. I'm using it in between all the other variables, so track width would be confusing because it would.
Right. So you've got spread width, spread length, and.
So I'm more of like, it's under the starting field.
Starting field.
Section.
Yeah. So. Yeah, I would say.
So it's still on the track width would be.
Yeah. So you could do horizontal offset.
Yeah.
And spread length. What's the length?
I can demonstrate.
Is that the distance down backwards through the track? Yeah. So that. So spread length doesn't. It doesn't immediately jump out of me as being the right name for that variable, right? Because there'll be a racing term for it.
Yeah.
Right. And if you were.
Yeah. I would check to see what's it called on the racetrack.
Yeah. Because one of the advantages is if you do call it what's it actually called on a racetrack.
Yeah.
Then you're kind of using the professional language of racing, which means if someone comes to it with some additional knowledge that you don't have, but they do have racing knowledge, they're immediately in and understand what you're referring to, right? So, if there is a name for it in a particular environment, right? So you often find this with health. If you're working with health databases or with health people, it's far better to use the word that they use for the thing rather than the word you come up with it. Even though you might not be working with a health person right now, when a health person comes to it, they'll go, what? Why is it called that? That means something completely different to me. So I had a long debate with Marish in my office about the word speculation versus investment, for example. Right? What is speculation? What's investment? Because in Polish, speculation has a slightly different meaning to in English. and so we didn't agree on what was a speculation versus what was an investment. And that's because the language is very specific in that area. And I think, yeah, so for racetrack placement, I would probably use, you know, starter placement, but there will be a term. I'm sure there'll be a term that they use for horizontal, like that offset, and it just means that you know, because length could mean either the length that way or the offset back through the track, right? So I'd almost like this could be distance to line, or there'll be something like there'll be some term that refers to how far back from the starting line you are, right? So grid distance to start, or grid distance offset, or something, right? So there'll be because these are like the grid position, because they talk that in starting grid. So that is your grid. There'll be like a horizontal grid offset and a forward or distance or racing offset or something, right? So handicap or something. But yeah, okay. But no, that's yeah. So you've got those in here. That affects those. Affects those. You've only got 6. Now you could probably go to more. How would you do?
Yeah, that would be a messy job. And
why would it be a messy job? Because you've got 6 array elements and start positions. What happens when you make 9?
Well, I can't just add. I could try to add and see what happens. I don't think it allows me, no, because these are not based on what I do here. These are like the construction script is. Oh, you made a change to the track. I will go through and have a look. Oh no, this is not correct. I changed. I will make it right.
Right. Okay. So these come in as constructed values.
Have to dig for it.
Right. You'd have to again digging. where is it constructed? So how long does it take you to find that? Right. Well, I know it's now 4 o'clock, so I just want to see how long it takes you to find where you construct that. Because in text-based code, I would expect that to be somewhere relatively easy to find.
That might have been that simple. Yeah. Okay.
Aha.
It's just there.
All right.
So, but yeah, that's a loose number in the code.
Right. So there's a number. So this would be a magic number,
Yeah,
right?
that's a magic number.
Yeah. But you probably don't expect to change the number of races you support
No.
very often, right? Because it should potentially be tied to the number of players there are,
Yeah,
or
our lobbies are also like currently just accepting a maximum of 6 connections.
So there's a problem with the magic number 6 being in a lot of places.
yeah. So given that you've got a magic number 6 in a lot of places, I would start thinking about, can you connect that to a setting? Can you name it something like max number of players, right?
Yep.
And then
Yeah, put it in somewhere.
yeah, do it as a lookup. Yeah. So that would improve your code by doing that. Right? So one of the things you can do is now, so that actual, what we just did then is an example of refactoring code. And you can put that in as part of the documentation of your, improving the quality of your code. Because one of the things we did there is we didn't actually change the functionality. Well, we actually did change the functionality a little bit.
Yep.
We generalized it,
Yep.
and we made it more understandable. Right? So that was a good refactoring of code. So when you guys refactored code, you can put that in, and in that if you can go and take a snapshot of how it was, which means you might have to undo what you just did, but get a snapshot of how it was, get a snapshot of how it is, then say why you changed it and what benefits the new code has over the old code. Right? In that case, it's more general and it's easier to understand. Okay? So that's the sort of thing I want to see you guys being able to work through and say, okay, this is how I make my code better, and this is why it's better. Okay, so any other questions? Right,
We
so
changed up the
We fixed the other module.
you fix the other module. Aha, okay. So now you do Append if it equals number of lines, then set index to 0. Right. So local next loop, so that's So I'm still, so when it's false, it gets the normal return back.
So yeah, but then they get from the false, so just
Oh, right, so this false leads that through, otherwise true sets it to 0 and then puts it through. Right, okay. So to some extent that does look like something that number of splines equals. That tells me that something's happening at the end. Yep, so do you like opinion here? Does who preferred the mod option? Because it's perfectly acceptable to prefer modulo. And who prefers this one? You guys should prefer that one?
Yeah.
Okay. Because, you know, again, these are sometimes opinions, and I will sometimes have opinions. You guys will go, no, that's not the way I'd like to do it. But, and if you do have an opinion that doesn't match with mine, you should be able to discuss it and justify it. Okay? So next week we want to do continuous integration. So we'll look at Bamboo and Travis. So Travis CI and Bamboo are continuous integration services. And so we can look at the setup for those, right? And if you want to try and build those, then we can try and work out how you guys can start doing some continuous integration testing. Okay? Cool. Right. We'll see you next week.